Welcome to the Future of Supply Chain, presented by Dynamo. Each episode, we sit down with leaders in the industry as we build the future of supply chain together. Let's get into the show. Here's our host, Santosh Sankar.
Hey folks, welcome back to the Future Supply Chain Podcast. I'm your one-armed host, Santosh Sankar, and joining me today to chat about putting an end to spreadsheets is Alex Yaseen, co-founder and CEO at Parabola. Welcome, Alex.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So I'm going to give a quick kudos to Prince of Factor Quality, who ultimately linked us up here, and that's why we now have the privilege of hosting you on our podcast. But we're going to jump into a lot of different topics today. I'd love to just pause briefly and give our audience that 90-second overview on what Parabola is. And that way we kind of have a uniform level of understanding and a baseline to work from.
Yeah, sounds great. Parabola is a collaborative data tool designed for kind of like the non-technical person who really knows the ins and outs of their process. They are doing things really manually, probably copying and pasting in spreadsheets, doing data entry out of PDFs, joining big data sets together, and kind of keeping their businesses running through sheer force of will. Usually it's like an operations or finance person. And we work a lot in e-commerce, CPG, retail, and then freight logistics companies. So companies like Peloton and Brooklinen and cool e-commerce brands, from small up and coming to some of the largest. And then like Flexport, Uber Freight, and some of the big freight providers on the freight logistics side. Parabola basically looks like a flowchart. You drag and drop a bunch of different steps in, connects to any of your data wherever it exists. And those operators I'm talking about, the subject matter experts, tend to deal with lots of unstructured data, so the PDFs and the crazy spreadsheets, alongside some of the more normal parts of their data stack, so things coming from a WMS or from Shopify or from their from Snowflake, from the data team. And combining those data sets together, especially dealing with the unstructured data, is really where we shine. So we give you a lot of ability to inject the subject matter expertise that you know about the business, use some of our both regular tools and some of our AI-powered tools to handle that unstructured data and get it all together in one place to automate whatever that otherwise really manual process you're doing is.
So what's the Alex story? How did you ultimately kind of get into the world of what appears to be spreadsheets, workflow, automation, and then kind of add any number of the verticals that you now serve? But how did this all start?
I have always kind of had maybe one foot in both worlds of like the tech world and non-tech world. I've always really liked working with technology. As a kid, I built computers. I learned to code when I was younger. Just always like really liked troubleshooting and like solving things. But I think like most of my friends and most of my family weren't really that person, weren't those people. And so I frequently found myself in the role of trying to explain, your computer isn't like taking you to someplace, your browser isn't acting up. It's just you did something that your computer deterministically reacted to, and like you're just not kind of like using it in the most effective way. And I find that so many people look at technology as a lack of agency, or like having to fight with technology to get something done, when it can, at its best, be such an incredible tool for having such a leveraged impact and having so much creativity and hopefully like fun along the way. And so I've always looked at it as a bit of a like personal mission to help as many people as possible get that experience of like fun, high leverage. Technology is great, as opposed to you're fighting it and losing agency as technology advances.
Sure.
That kind of evolved, I guess, into studied finance and computer science in undergrad, and then I ended up going into strategy consulting in like finance world, due to not really knowing exactly where I wanted to be and wanting to see a few things. In finance world, in strategy consulting, quickly found like a niche in data modeling, business case analysis, things that benefited from the technical skill set I had. And I got to know along the way, working at a few like really large Fortune 100 like CPG and similar brands, that I was just good at working with data. The people I was helping on the client side were these incredible in the weeds subject matter experts who knew the ins and outs of their business. They'd been there for 30 years in some cases. They had all the vendor relationships. They knew where all the skeletons were buried. And like most importantly, I think they had a list of 1,000 ideas that they knew that if only somebody paid attention to them, let them implement their ideas, whatever, could actually move their whole companies forward, not just improve some small part of the process. And it was really clear that they had kind of like an engineering mindset. They just didn't happen to know how to code. And so I got extra excited about taking that. What does it mean to help people who don't feel empowered by technology feel empowered by technology, and apply it in that kind of more focused way to taking these subject matter experts who are behind the scenes at every important company and help kind of shine a spotlight on them and help elevate their work and say it's not just manual, keep the lights on work. It's actually stuff that could drive your whole company forward, can help you deliver end customer experiences that you really want, kind of shine a light on this like operator in the weeds person.
And so, I'm going to kind of jump into Parabola here. You've now made it your life's mission to, I think I might have opened up with saying replacing, but it really is in part leveling up kind of the age-old spreadsheet. And I'd love to just get a spin of the platform, if you would. What are kind of the key parts or features of the platform? And what are the types of benefits that one could realize by adopting the Parabola toolset?
So when people work with spreadsheets in this, operations world, they're frequently not using the really complex formulas, building macros, whatever. Some people do, but for the most part, they're using Excel as like a playground for wrapping their heads around data and maybe doing some like manual data cleaning and combining tasks. So when we go in the weeds and spend time with our best users, or sometimes our users who struggle, we really want to understand like what are they trying to accomplish? How are they like using day-to-day little interactions? With spreadsheets, it's a lot of copying and pasting to get everything into one place. Maybe you're writing a VLOOKUP formula to like look at the overlap of two data sets. A lot of the time you're doing like you have 15 different find and replace rules that that you always do to get rid of prefixes on SKUs or like other weird data cleanup issues. And you end up basically being like, you have some kind of like SOP that's probably in your head that is, here's how I get the data from, I have a 3PL that's emailing me a CSV file and I have to go in and download data out of like a portal from one of the retail partners we work with. And I'm expecting to get screenshots from like an iPhone from our manufacturing partners overseas. And I need to somehow like work that data in. And you're somehow getting that all into a spreadsheet just as your kind of core like notebook, workbook kind of tool. And it's cool. Like, spreadsheets are awesome that you can do that, but it's really time consuming. It's really potentially error prone. And most of those people, while incredibly critical to their jobs, kind of also hate their jobs because they're dependent on, if they're even out sick one day, like everything stops working. And it's like it's a very high stress kind of mode to be in. Parabola, we seek to meet those types of users where they are by kind of feeling a little bit more like you just hired an analyst onto your team who can understand exactly how you work and take a lot of that stuff over for you. So as I described before, Parabola looks like a flowchart. You drag and drop a bunch of steps into a canvas, and you describe the process that you're doing. And it should, like if we've done our job right, the level of abstraction of each of those steps is the same way you would talk to another person. So first, I need to pull in data from Shopify. I also need to grab this PDF out of an email that comes in every 10 minutes. And I have to like pull something out of like Looker or whatever. I combine that all together based on these sets of rules. I add these 3 cleanup logics. Like if this condition is the case, there's like an error thing and I have to send an email to somebody. And if not, I have my like inventory reconciliation report. As you build in Parabola, everything kind of happens and shows you the results live. So one of the amazing things about a spreadsheet is that you can kind of guess and check your way to success. So every time you connect to Shopify in Parabola, or every time you say, like, I want to combine the 2 data sets, it'll actually show you the full data. And so we've done a lot of technical work behind the scenes to make it just feel like you're having a conversation with somebody that's like constantly saying, so is this what you meant, or is that what you meant? And it happens like real time. So it's a really fast process to build things. And then it's all just like in plain language. So it's really easy. You don't have to learn a new tool. You don't have to learn how to code. It all just works by describing your process to somebody. So ideally, it's easy to explain and also like very trustworthy because you see everything that's happening. And we can spend more time going into all this, but we've along the way borrowed a lot of the best practices from the world of software engineering. So you, the user, don't have to know that any of this is happening, But the end result of what you build is this really nice flow chart that's also automating an important process in your business. You can also share and reuse components of that process across your teams. You don't have to have everybody reinventing the wheel and repeating themselves. And it works with a lot of the best practices of software engineering, where it's tested and validated, easily repeatable, and can run on really large data sets.
And so, what would you say to the skeptics who always point back to that spreadsheets still endure? They have not been displaced. They have almost like a ubiquitous or omnipresent value. How do you kind of react and respond to that type of an attitude or statement?
I think it's true. The best companies we work with, the most tech-enabled, most high-flying brands that other companies probably aspire to become, have crazy spreadsheet processes everywhere. Even before Parabola, you were asking about like the origin story. I had a particularly extreme example in consulting world. I temporarily got brought in to work on a healthcare client, actually, that was for the entire state of Colorado, responsible for some of the claims approvals. So like, I need heart surgery, and like, is insurance going to pay for that? And they'd gotten really backlogged on their call centers by like months and months. So people were waiting around, and like really bad situations were happening. Like it was like a huge issue. And we were supposed to help figure out how to like improve the efficiency of call center before, as they also hired people. And the first question was like, how do we decide which team gets to like work on what kind of issue? And their answer was, like we use Craigslist. And it turned out that Craigslist was a joke name for a spreadsheet that somebody named Craig had made 5 years ago, that nobody knew how it worked. And Craig had just built a spreadsheet that somehow calculated the most efficient, so they thought, like, way to take, hey, I need heart surgery and I have these attributes, to like send them to the right customer support team who could decide if like yes or no, like you could get that heart surgery. And that's like supposed to be one of the most sophisticated things, like, in healthcare is very complicated. It should be very sophisticated. There's a lot of like messy and important, sensitive security stuff in there, and it was all powered by random spreadsheets. And the person didn't even work at the company anymore. So if that anecdote helps, like there are spreadsheets everywhere, and maybe always will be. But like the way we look at that is that people are operating off spreadsheets for a reason, and one of those reasons is that there's a whole set of use cases, people's day-to-day work, that is really bespoke. So you can't just go buy off-the-shelf software that somebody has built that like solves it perfectly for you. It's really complex, and so you can't use simple automation tools like Zapier. It's also like really annoying to do it manually. You probably can't outsource it to some other company. But then most importantly, there's things that are really dynamic. So you're getting unstructured data meaning a PDF that has a bunch of different line items and some metadata at the top and a weird image and sometimes a signature and a bunch of weird conditions. And every time somebody sends you that PDF, it's a little bit different. Sometimes it's a scan, sometimes it's a different format, sometimes there's 10 pages, sometimes there's 8 pages. Like you can't really trust a schema. Or maybe it's coming in the body of an email or a spreadsheet that's formatted differently that has user-generated text in it. Things that are just like not sufficiently predictable and need to be eyeballed by previously a human. And the combination of things, really dynamic, really complex, and changes frequently, means there like haven't historically been solutions. You couldn't even if you have an engineer sitting next to you who knows how to write code isn't the right medium for things that change that often, because you just need the subject matter expert to be in there tinkering, changing, validating that it's correct. And so those things have historically needed spreadsheets. This is one of the big reasons why spreadsheets are needed. And we are seeking to make all of those things better. So it's a really hard challenge. I think we've picked a hard domain of problem to help people solve. I think it's also really important because at our best customers, they've already tried every solution possible. They have an ERP, they've brought in consultants, they've used simple automation tools, and they're left with this still large amount of spreadsheet work that we're helping them tackle.
So, given we're sitting on the Future of Supply Chain podcast here, I'd be remiss not asking, but who are the kind of customers that are leveraging Parabola to do really interesting things and maybe even kind of power certain elements of their supply chain operations? Are there kind of any specific examples or case studies that would be worth highlighting for us to
Yeah.
kind of lean into the value customers are realizing?
Yeah. So by the time this podcast comes out, we will have just launched basically like an advisor program where we've invited a handful of our absolute favorite customers who internally we use as kind of our, this person is the example of this type of use case or this type of user that we want to have. So we'll have, I think we're starting with around 10, maybe a few more of these advisors, and we'll be growing it from there, who will be talking a lot about the awesome work Parabola does behind the scenes with them. A few highlights. Lindsay from Brooklyn and the like betting company has some really interesting, I think, takes on how operations historically has been kind of a overlooked org within the company, and at leadership team level, marketing tends to get what marketing wants, and operations kind of has to get it done. And she and her team have seen a really big change in then being able to say, actually, like we can deliver some revenue wins, and we have some ideas for how we can ask customers to think differently about expectations and returns processes or shipping times or whatever, or just being able to like stock stores and make sure that things are really ready to go. So she'll be talking a little bit about Parabola. We have a few cool brands like that. And then maybe on like the larger, more complicated side, Flexport is a substantial user of ours, and I can't go too into the weeds on specifically what they do, but just out of like confidentiality. But they're using us across their business to really help deliver the end customer experience they most want to have to their customers, and they're able to say yes to as many of their customers' intricate SOP needs because they invest in cutting edge technology. They use a lot of interesting AI stuff, and a lot of that through Parabola.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to move forward here. And a few weeks ago, at this point, it might even be a few months ago at this point, I took to LinkedIn to highlight the importance of data infrastructure. And the more time I've spent learning about Parabola and kind of understanding what you guys are doing, the more I feel like this is a tool that organizations could use in this regard. And when I say data infrastructure, more so as a precursor or a limiter, in some cases, the enabler of effectively actually using AI and LLMs at scale within an organization, right? Most of these large organizations, you might have a division or a certain area that has very robust data infrastructure. But by and large, that is not the case. And so I'd love your take in and around this, because clearly you're seeing this happening or not happening in real time. But this feels like potentially one of those missing enablers that more people need to talk about.
We obviously certainly believe so. I think even at companies that do have a lot of data infrastructure built out, this is kind of just as important of an issue, because especially in supply chain, e-commerce world, things move too quickly to keep up. Data infrastructure is not going to keep up with how quickly things are moving, how experimental people need to be. The strikes at ports that are happening right now are an interesting example of all of a sudden every company needs to find how do we route items through different distribution centers. Maybe we need to spin up a relationship with a new vendor who we weren't working with before. Technically, that is difficult to integrate into NetSuite and into Snowflake and into like your overall data infrastructure.
Sure.
And so you need to find a way to like treat those, to be more nimble and treat those things as more like fungible, I guess. And so maybe some of the best companies have already set up some infrastructure to be able to be that anti-fragile to these kinds of events, if you will. But haven't run into one that feels like they're doing that successfully, and you constantly have to break into the escape hatch of spreadsheets or something else. As you think about broader data infrastructure, then like AI has this promise of being able to be super helpful in that regard. It can handle, it can interpret things that aren't exactly consistent. It's really good at being more flexible to we're talking about different PDFs that could come in. If they don't look the same, a human knows that they're the same thing, even if they don't look exactly the same. And AI increasingly is really good at doing that as well. But So we've recently started hosting dinners for operators to get to know each other and connect and share stories. Minimally Parabola focused, mostly just giving them a chance to connect. And one of the most common topics at the dinners I've joined has been, hey, like, what are you guys doing with AI? Because everybody keeps asking us, our CEO keeps asking us to do stuff, and we haven't found a way to actually drastically change our day-to-day work. And so Parabola's take here is that makes sense. AI of today, certainly, even AI, super AGI of 10 years from now, doesn't know the the in the weeds details of your business, your team, your set of vendors, and all those permutations lead to a ton of unique things about your company. But you, the subject matter expert, are kind of the only thing in the world that knows how that works.
Tribal knowledge, if you would.
Tribal knowledge, yeah. And it's actually important. Like people, that is like kind of the intellectual property of your company. And so there's no way you can fully outsource that to AI. But also AI is really good at operating at scale on some of this unstructured data. And so if you can take your subject matter expertise and combine that with the data structuring capabilities of AI, and combine those things together, it gets really exciting. And so Parabola, ideally, if we've done our job, is the best tool for encoding your subject matter expertise in a flowchart, in a data transformation flow, and also pulling in a bunch of really cool large language model powered tools. So we let you parse documents with large language models. We let you take, if every row of data is a little bit different, we help you categorize it into buckets that are easier to work with. You can take form data from your customers, and maybe there's like return reasons that are typed in the warehouse or something, and we can help you extract like a consistent sentiment or a consistent something else out of that. Little bits of AI scattered all throughout these processes that suddenly let operators actually use AI for the first time.
It's fascinating. So I'm going to completely deviate at this point, and we're going to talk about building a business, right? You're founder, CEO. This is largely inspired by the opportunities as well as some of the frustrations that you observed, but also felt acutely in your prior roles, and decided to go make it your life's mission, or at least for this period of your life, have made it your mission, in part by building Parabola. And so, my first question is, we have founders, because at the stage we invest, I would say over half of our investments, we're usually kind of that first professional investor, pre-seed these days, is how it's described.
Yeah, how are the names to change? Yeah.
And kind of when we got started 8-9 years ago, that was a seed round. So as kind of things have changed and the venture industry itself is maturing, the thing we've noticed is our founders almost all come to this juncture where they need to make their first marketing hire. What would be your recommendation to them around making this first hire, noting kind of you're a B2B business, you're selling into a variety of industries, but I'd say there's that legacy mentality. People are kind of holding on to their, old tools and, ways of doing stuff and getting stuff done. How does that inform ultimately who you bring in as that first marketing role?
I'm sure every company is somewhat unique. And certainly like when people gave me advice back then on this topic and others, I was always like, oh, I think we're totally unique and maybe that advice doesn't work. I think in hindsight, there are actually some pretty common trends and I think some general wisdom that's helpful. I think the biggest one there is just making sure, probably for all hires, but maybe marketing most importantly, that you're hiring someone who's correct for like the stage that you're at. And probably if you're talking about first marketing hire, pre-seed or seed or something like that, even if you think you have some product market fit, you probably don't have like real robust, it's just totally working like on easy mode product market fit. And so the most important thing is getting there. And iterations, like the ability to iterate quickly, I think is really important. And so at multiple phases of our company, including right now, we're going through versions of how do we experiment fast enough and how are we ruthless enough about our experiments in recognition that think in marketing particularly, there's a really big power law distribution of most things don't really work, or if they do, it's kind of barely if you squint, and a few things work incredibly well. And so since something out there in the world can work incredibly well, if you're not currently doing something that works just like crazy incredibly well, you owe it to yourself to find that thing. And so you have to be willing to iterate and fail on a bunch of things in order to get there. And so I think a first marketer needs to maybe be a little bit creative to come up with those experiments. But I think more than that, needs to be comfortable failing a lot. And needs to be organized at whether it's a project management or like tracking of the data or whatever, just to make sure that we're actually running those experiments, doing a high quality job at them, measuring the results, and just like ruthlessly throwing out everything that's not working so we can get towards the things that are working.
I love that. I think that's very astute advice, and honestly not something that I hear shared very commonly in regards to kind of the attributes, characteristics that ultimately enable them to do their job well, which is running experiments, tracking the data, making a judgment call, and then kind of informing that next cycle or feedback loop, right?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of other things that are great, that ideally they're super creative and a great writer and have a lot of taste and all of those things. And ideally you find somebody who can do all of those things. But I think the ability to iterate, test, and just be kind of ruthless about we're not done until we found the thing that's just working incredibly well is probably the most important.
And, do you have any tips for getting in front of buyers at legacy industries, right? They tend to be slow to adopt. They're equally getting bombarded with a ton of content these days. They probably have a list of problems, if you would, that are 100 plus long, and they're only going to, in any given year, address the top 3 or 4 things on that list in a meaningful way. So how does one even kind of get their attention?
I think if you're privileged or however you want to think about it, to be working on something where those people are going out with an RFP looking for a piece of software and need to run a process, that's probably easy. You can get into that process and just be able to figure out how to outcompete all your competitors. If you're like us and are we're solving very important problems that ideally are somebody's number 1 or number 2 problem at the company, but they don't necessarily know that they're looking for a kind of slightly more horizontal general purpose solution like Parabola to that specific problem. We have to make sure that they're aware of us by the time they're thinking about that problem so that they are coming to us rather than coming up with, hiring an expensive consulting firm or whatever. And so in the operations and supply chain world, what we've found is we have built a really great product and we really love the team that we've assembled, and we just need to figure out how to kind of get some face time with those people. And help introduce them in the least salesy, most just authentic, kind of under-promising, over-delivering way. And so events have actually been incredibly good for us. And I was mentioning these dinners that we host. We will invite, 8 to 12, directors or VPs of supply chain from companies of, kind of relatively narrow bands. So we try to batch them into slightly bigger, slightly smaller companies. So that they have things to talk with each other about. People get really excited. I think like marketers get invited to lots of things, founders get invited to a lot of things, but operations and supply chain people don't really. And behind the scenes, one of the most common questions we get is just like, why does it feel like I'm reinventing the wheel, and how do other people solve this problem? And there's kind of like a lot of FOMO or something just about like you being worried that you're getting left behind when other people have found a cool solution. The answer is frequently that nobody has found the solution, but so connecting people at these dinners has been really fantastic. We're trying to host as many as we can. We have, everyone gets oversubscribed, so we're trying to just host more of them.
That's awesome.
And I think that's kind of been just like the old fashioned, just give people an opportunity to meet you, experience the product, don't be overly pushy and salesy, and just actually deliver value. I think if you're delivering really credible value, people understand that and are much happier and more willing to engage and spend their time with you.
I love that. Humanistic.
Yep.
Last question here on business building, right? As you kind of reflect on the last several years that you've been building Parabola, what is one thing you wish somebody told you or that you knew about building and leading teams, right? What is that? What would you pass on?
There's a lot more than one, I think.
Pick your
I,
favorite
my number one.
yeah.
I think probably let's see, across like phases of company, there are different things that are the most important hair on fire problem, and a lot of other things that don't matter quite so much. And I think it's really hard as maybe the person picking the strategy, and also for the people who are part of the team trying to like make this work, to prioritize and focus like sufficiently clearly. Working on that one thing that if if we figure this thing out, we kind of have made it to the next level, and if we don't, no matter how many other things we do, won't actually fix it. Feels obvious to say right now, but in the weeds, it's like in the day to day, it's really hard to be like, oh, but like this thing feels important. This other person's gonna be really disappointed if they don't get to work on this project, and like this one customer is willing to pay us a lot of money, and it's not quite the right thing, but it's a lot of money now, and maybe that'll be exciting. And it's kind of hard to zoom out enough to say like this is important, everything else doesn't matter. And I think every time I've looked back at over the past quarter or year or whatever, I've always wished we had focused more and wished we had discarded more of those things. And one of the best analogies I've heard recently came from one of our angel investors who is talking about not just letting some fires burn and not worrying about putting them out, but to enable you to do that, going out of your way to help the whole team point out that like, oh yeah, this fire actually does exist. It's right over there. It's a small little fire. We've put like some nice stones around it so it doesn't overflow its little fire pit. And we'll keep looking at it. And if something changes, if the fire takes off, if it does somehow escape the stone fire pit, then we'll deal with it. But for right now, it's fine. And I think that idea of asking everybody to talk about the problem or the fire that exists, but intentionally not worry about it, is helpful. Because if you don't point it out, then everybody every day is like, well, there seems to be a fire here and nobody's talking about it. Am I crazy? What's going on? Maybe I should just work on it. But if you intentionally go out of your way and say, this fire's there and we're not going to worry about it, we're just like going to focus on this other thing that's like a much more imminent threat that's coming to kill us, that somehow I think helps that like focus actually happen.
Yeah, no, I certainly appreciate that. So Alex, we've covered a lot of ground. I'm going to bring us home here. And one of the things that I like to end with, it's a bit of fun, it's lighthearted, gets us to know you a bit better, but I call it this or that. I'm going to share two options, and you get to pick one and share why, and we'll just roll right through it. You ready?
Let's do it.
First up, white paper or podcast?
I think podcast, because people are a little less polished. White paper is interesting to digest and get a little bit more in the weeds on maybe. But it's the result of a lot of editing that's happened. And I think in a podcast, no matter how good of a speaker somebody is, they're going to be a little bit more authentic, a little more real. You can understand, especially if you watch the video, maybe you can like understand the facial gestures, and it just gets you a little bit like more bandwidth, I think, of the information.
API or EDI?
I kind of want to cop out on this one. I'd say neither, because I think both of them are temporary stopping points. I think the best communication, human to human right now, nobody speaks in API or EDI to each other. They just like send each other quick emails or texts. I think all of a sudden over the past year, maybe even more recently, that type of communication is possible with computers as well, with the advent of some of these large language models. And there's a lot of tooling that's necessary, and it's not easy for every single person to use today. But I think the logical interface that we're converging towards is actually, can you just like email to a company, and it doesn't matter if a human answers that or the SaaS application answers that or something else answers it. But that instruction or that ask or what piece of information can get digested and used. And so email in or email out or text in and text out, basically kind of like a unstructured API, I think is the answer. In some ways it's interesting because EDI historically almost is closer to that than APIs are. So in some ways we're going back around. But I think the fully unstructured future is actually probably what's going to happen.
And last up, football or soccer?
What do I call soccer? Football or soccer, or American football versus soccer?
American football or soccer, which our European friends would call it football.
Yeah. Maybe the question gave it away then. I think soccer. I went to USC. We had a big football team. Enjoyed the tailgating experience and all that. So like football as well. But I think that like energy at a soccer game in a soccer stadium is a little bit unique and particularly fun.
Awesome. Well, with that, Alex, thanks for schooling us here a bit on what the future holds with Parabola for those of us who are power users sitting behind the scenes, operating the world's supply chains on various sorts of spreadsheets, as well as a lot of the tribal knowledge. It's embedded in the leaders that conduct these activities day to day. But look forward to your continued success. Cheers.
Appreciate it. Great.
Thanks for watching. Follow us at dynamo.vc for all the latest episodes. We'll see you next time.